Hello and welcome to my channel, NBSoundHopperUK, and the subject of this video will be 12-inch singles, 10 of my favourites. Extra tracks, extended versions, alternate mixes, or not being available in any other format. These are just a few of the reasons why 12-inch singles proved to be popular in the 1970s and 1980s. The arrival of CD singles put a hefty sized nail in the coffin of the continued commercial viability of 12-inch singles, although they did continue to be popular with DJs and turntablists thereafter. Despite getting rid of most of my vinyl at the end of the 1990s, I still have around about 100 or so 12-inch singles, which is more than enough to give me a reasonable choice for the purposes of this video and maybe another at some future point. The 10 I've selected are all from 1982 to 1985 and are in no particular order. As it's in the thumbnail for this video, I might as well start with Do You Believe in the West World by Theatre of Hate from 1982. Formed in 1980, this was their fourth single, each of them making a strong showing in the UK indie chart, but this was the first that gave them any sort of commercial success, reaching number 40 in the UK singles chart. They also made their one and only appearance on Top of the Pops with this single. Rhythmically, it's heavy on the tribal drums as well as spaghetti western style guitar. Propaganda, the B-side, is more straightforward rock, played in a similar tempo to the track Legion from their first single. On the 12-inch single, there are what could probably be described as dub mix versions of both tracks, where producer Mick Jones, guitarist of The Clash, does a good job of keeping them interesting and not too formulaic on the mixing front. Final track, Original Sin, is a re-recording or reinterpretation of the other track on their debut single. So 5 tracks, with all concerned, making a fine contribution. Promised You a Miracle by Simple Minds is also from 1982. Released a few months before featuring on the album New Gold Dream, 81, 82, 83, 84, it was their first UK top 20 hit. Simple Minds' style at this point in their career was somewhere between new romantic and post-punk. Promise You a Miracle is essentially a dance track that's equally listenable away from a club-type environment. However, it's the B-side that makes this one of my favourite singles. The tracks are sourced from their previous album, Sons and Fascinations / Sister Feelings Cool. First up is Theme for Great Cities, an instrumental where Michael McNeil's keyboards and Derek Forbes' bass parts are superbly written and played. For me, one of Simple Minds' most memorable tracks. Second is Seeing Out the Angel, a track which had vocals on the album but here is presented as an instrumental, and it's a contrast to the more complex playing on Theme for Great Cities. In fact, I'd say the beauty of this track is in demonstrating that at times less can be more when it comes to arrangement, a very hypnotic track. Shriekback in 1984, when Hand on My Heart was released, consisted of former XTC keyboard player and vocalist Barry Andrews, ex-Gang of Four bass player Dave Allen, guitarist and vocalist Carl Marsh, previously of Out of Blue 6, and Martin Baker on drums, Shriekback being his first recording band. Hand on My Heart sees a shift for the band from the harder-edged sound of earlier releases to a more polished one. A few beats per minute short to be regarded as an out-and-out dance track, Hand on My Heart retains enough momentum to still be lively. The singing style is fairly typical for Shriekback in that it's midway between a whisper and a mumble, but it has a quiet intensity and provides an air of mystique, almost. On the 12-inch single, it's an extended version of the opening track on the album Jam Science. Suck, the first track on the B-side, is the version from the same album. This time, though, the band are near enough full-on electro. Nerve, the second track on the B-side, goes closer to their older style, but it's a decent track nonetheless, albeit the fade-out is a bit early and severe. Next is A Gigantic Raft in the Philippines by It's Immaterial, also from 1984. This is a wonderfully strange single. To start with, though, I'll talk about the B-side, which has the 7-inch single version plus a track called The Mermaid. In essence, A Gigantic Raft in the Philippines is a pumped-up sea shanty type song with the rhythm section sounding quite Echo and the Bunnymen, the guitar a bit U2-ish, and the singer's voice a Bono meets Pete Wiley or Wah type crossover. It has a great sing-along chorus, plenty of background sound effects to add amusing atmosphere like seagulls, thunder and lightning, a creaking ship's mast, howling wind, and a ship's bell. The Mermaid contains many of these effects too, but it's a slow shanty mostly comprised of vocals, drums, keyboards, more as a texture, and bizarrely fragments of saxophone. The Tempest on the A side takes the 7-inch version, extends it, and replaces most of the singing with spoken word, embellishing the subject of the lyrics. It's all slightly bonkers and just my kind of thing. Jürgen is a track on Einsturzende Neubauten's 1985 album Halber Mensch, and the 12-inch single is an Adrian Sherwood remix of it. Built around a kind of high-speed ticking and a metallic beat for Einsturzende Neubauten, it's quite a conventionally structured track. However, nobody should be fooled. This is still the sound of an industrial band in its prime. The vocals are a typical blend of part menace and part hysteria. Most melodic elements seem to come from sampled fragments via something like a Fairlight CMI synthesizer, and metal percussion is around the fringes of it all. A great track, as is the first B-side track, Seela Brent, where the mix of relatively quiet and loud sections amplifies the effect of the vocals. Second on the B-side is a cover of Sand, a track previously performed by Nancy Sinatra and Lee Hazelwood. It's pretty much played along the lines of the original. By this time, band member Blixa Bargeld was also in Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, and it's a track that I could easily imagine them having played. Cocteau Twins' first release was Lullabies, an EP that came out in 1982 on 4AD Records. It contains 3 tracks, Feathers or Blades, Elasticized Laughing, and It's All But an Arclark. Without doubt, a band reaching out to find their own sound. Feathers or Blades has more than a touch of Susie and the Banshees about it, and it has a similar tempo to that which would later be found on Inner Angelhood from their second album, Head Over Heels. Elasticized Laughing is slower paced, and it's closer to how they'd sound on their debut album, Garlands. It's All But an Arclark has a swirling, slightly claustrophobic feel and is the longest track on the EP. It was rather coolly received upon release, but even here, vocalist Elizabeth Fraser sounded like someone with her own style rather than being a Susie clone. Something I've rarely heard mentioned about the band, so I'll say it here, is their imaginative use of a drum machine in comparison to many of their contemporaries who also used one. Lullabies was an extremely promising start. Death Cult existed for about 8 months between the demise of Southern Death Cult and then renaming themselves The Cult. 2 singles were released in 1983, the second one being God's Zoo, but the one I'll be talking about is the Death Cult EP, which only came out as a 12-inch single. Former Southern Death Cult vocalist Ian Astbury and ex-Theatre of Hate guitarist Billy Duffy made a great combination, and the 4 tracks on this EP are all excellent. Brothers Grimm, Ghost Dance, Horse Nation, and Christians build upon what Southern Death Cult had done previously, but with Duffy on guitar, it all sounds far more confident and assured than Southern Death Cult were. What you end up with is a kind of goth influenced by Native American culture and imagery, and there's no shortage of the dramatics normally associated with goth either. Although they didn't release an album as Death Cult, these tracks are all available on compilations subsequently released in their name. At face value, you don't get a lot for your money with 23 Skidoo's single Coup from 1984. The A-side and B-side combined are under 8.5 minutes, with the B-side being a dub reworking of the A-side. Add to that, Coup is a remix of the track FUGI from their album Urban Gamelan, and you might be tempted to think that you're being ripped off. However, Coup has a very different feel from FUGI to the extent that it's well worth getting. First of all, the slap bass, which is a background element of FUGI, is brought right into the foreground of Coup. So the ominous tone of FUGI is transformed into something with more physicality about it. Coup also includes brass instruments, which add brighter colours than those on FUGI. There are additional voice samples too, which are used effectively. Oh, and the awesome main bass line from FUGI is retained on Coup. The B-side version in the Palace doesn't pull up any trees, but it's functional and it's not the worst dub mix you'll ever hear. Ultimately, Coup demonstrates that you could take a great track and remix it into one with its own identity and still be compared positively with the original. The Bomb Party from Leicester in the UK released their first 3 singles in 1985. They're all excellent in my opinion, with the 4-track EP New Messiah being the pick of them. If you imagine the Cramps, the Gun Club and the Birthday Party pre-Junkyard thrown together, then that's the space the Bomb Party worked within. Or perhaps, to put it another way, a dark, grimy garage rock for the 1980s with a little humour. There are 4 tracks on the EP and the tempo picks up with each one. Yeah, Yeah, Yeah gets the ball rolling with a loose and dirty Peter Gunn style riff. A wave of feedback and distortion, a rumbling bass line and tribal drums propel Great White Hope. The title track is my favourite of the 4. Again, lots of distorted guitar going on here, and things get quite frenetic on the final track, Wasted, which rounds off a terrific EP from a band that, unfortunately, didn't really get that much recognition. Before talking about my final selection, here's a look at what's coming soon.
Please don't throw it.
Hey Jimmy,
Last, but by no means least, is Compulsion by Test Department, released in 1983. I first heard Test Department earlier that year with the track Shockwork on the Various Artists compilation Batcave, Young Limbs and Numb Hymns. To my mind, Test Department provided the standout track on that album. So a few months later, debut single Compulsion appeared on the Some Bizarre label, and it's a monster of a track. It's raw industrial music combined with technology. The exhilarating sound of a scrapyard turned into a collection of energetic rhythmic instruments, along with a sampled pneumatic drill. This single has a strong link to Cabaret Voltaire, as the cover was designed by Alan Fish, and the B-side tracks, Pulsations 1 and 2, were produced by Richard H. Kirk and Stephen Malander. They're basically remixes of Compulsion with electronics thrown in, resulting in something that, with the benefit of hindsight, was a fair way ahead of its time. I've seen several videos about industrial music on YouTube, as well as lists on places like Discogs, and Test Department are rarely mentioned, which seems like a strange omission to me. They've done some great stuff. So of the 10 I've chosen, Simple Minds, Cocteau Twins and Death Cult, as the cult went on to become very popular. Where the rest are concerned though, anyone watching who is a fan of any of them? How about giving them a shout in the comments section if you are? As I said at the start, I may do another of these videos about 12-inch singles covering a similar period. Definitely on horizon will be a video about some of the 7-inch singles I have, which will cover the period 1976 to 1985. In the video description, there are links to a track from each of the singles I've spoken about. Details about subscribing, commenting, etc. are displayed at the end of this video. And in the meantime, if you've made it this far, thanks for watching.